Hello and welcome. You're joining us here in the European Parliament where we have today's question and answer session with MEP leader Nigel Farage. Nigel, thanks for joining us here today. Can you start off by telling us more about UKIP policies in Europe?
Well, our policy is that we like Europe, but not the European Union.
Okay.
Not this thing with this wretched flag you can see before you. This attempt to take away the individuality and democracy of nation states, to centralise everything in three big institutions, the European Commission, the European Council, and of course the European Court. And we want a Europe of trade, a Europe of cooperation, a Europe where we do business together and have reciprocal relationships, but not a Europe that has these huge buildings with all these ghastly overpaid people, a Europe that makes our laws and costs us a fortune. That's not the Europe we want. We want to divorce ourselves amicably from political union and to replace that with a genuine free trade agreement.
And do you think UKIP is the best policy for doing this? I mean, UKIP party is the best for doing it. And why do you think it's such a big issue?
Well, we're the only party saying it. I mean, what is so remarkable is that we have in England anyway, we have a Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative parties. They all say the same thing. They all say we must be part of this union. Oh, we'll amend it, we'll reform it, we'll bend it and shape it. And so only UKIP is there clearly saying we should not be part of political union. We want trade and cooperation. And I think actually what's really interesting is that 10 years ago, when I made these arguments, people said, well, you know, this all sounds a bit odd. Does it really matter that much? Is Europe that important? Do you know what? It is important. It's important because if, let's say, you're one of our 4 million small business people, every piece of employment legislation, every piece of health and safety, every piece of environmental legislation doesn't come from Westminster, doesn't come from people that we send there and vote for and from our own government. It comes from these European institutions. So its effect on our life is now huge. And in fact, something like 75% of our laws are now made by the institutions of the European Union. Well, that is not, in my view, living in a self-governing democracy.
But Nigel, then again, wouldn't you, many people argue being in the European Union is a great benefit for Britain.
For them it is, yes.
And what it is because it gives Britain more of a voice and more of an impact on the global stage, being a part of a team rather than being an individual isolated country.
Well, two answers to that. Firstly, everyone that says that to you is earning a salary out of the European Union. You know, amazing. Those that can argue for their own self-interest tend to do it very, very well. Now, this argument about influence, ever since the 1970s, we've been told by the Foreign Office and by leader after leader, we have more influence on the world stage. OK, let me try you with this. We're the 5th biggest trading country in the world. We've always been merchants and traders. The Brits are very good at it. When the World Trade Organization meets to talk about global trade talks, we're asked to leave the room. Leave the room. Even little countries, even Hong Kong is allowed by the Chinese to stay in the room. We're asked to leave the room because we're represented by one unelected commissioner for all these different European states. So actually, how much influence does Britain have on global trade? None. And if we go, no, I haven't finished yet. If we go on down this route, we now have the European Union with an emerging, evolving foreign policy that wants to replace us on the UN Security Council. The answer is, globally, small countries like Norway and Switzerland have far more say because they're involved with all these different arenas than we will as part of this union.
But what do you say to people who suggest that your party is very extreme?
People have tried to do that. And in fact, if you think about it, all through the history of mankind, whether it's in science, or business, or politics, if you come along, challenge the consensus, say the emperor's got no clothes, people will always attack you by saying you're extreme. And we've been through all this. We've been called racist, xenophobic. I mean, we've had all this stuff, all this abuse hurled at us. But you know what? It hasn't stuck because it isn't true. We are a predominantly libertarian party. We believe in free markets. We believe in self-government. We believe in democracy. We believe in helping businesses actually get up off the ground and establish themselves. We believe in social mobility through grammar schools and opportunities. In no way can UKIP be said to be an extreme party. And actually, really, if you look at it, both on the European question, both in Britain and the rest of Europe, our view is now the majority view amongst most voters.
Okay, Nigel. What would you say are the similarities or differences between you and the BNP party?
Well, They are a protectionist party who want to put tariffs up on goods that come in from outside the UK. We are a free trade party who believe that just having a free trade deal with the European Union is much too small and much too backward for what we want. We want to have a free trade deal with the English-speaking world, the Commonwealth, etc., etc., etc. So that's on trade. In terms of race, if you like, is it Article 2 of the BNP Constitution, prohibits anybody from being even a member of the BNP if they come from sort of mixed race or different race backgrounds. We are colourblind in UKIP. We're not interested in people who are black or white or yellow. We're just not interested. People are people, and if they're legal UK citizens, they're part of the same family that we're part of. And indeed, an increasing number of ethnic minority candidates now stand for UKIP in elections. So we're completely nothing to do with them on that issue.
So it must be a great insult if people did put you in the same category as BNP, for example.
In the early days, they tried. In the early days, they tried. Now, even amongst the sort of type of press that don't like us, if it's the New Statesman or whatever else it may be, they may call us all sorts of things. They don't call us racist anymore because it simply isn't true.
Okay, let's move on to the Eurozone, for example. Now, the Eurozone is a big mess at the moment with frequent uncertainty, the markets and bankers, and with countries. Do you think Britain not joining the Euro was the best thing it ever done?
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. It would have been a catastrophe. It would have been a catastrophe. And I'm pleased to say that there are now some people out there who, Max Hastings and people like that, who are now saying, sorry, we made a mistake. Thank goodness we weren't listened to at the time. One or two idiots like Paddy Ashdown still think we should join the euro, but they're few in number. It's a very good thing we didn't do it. The argument used to be, well, Nigel, would you join Britain up to the euro if it was in our national interest? My response is this: it can never be in your national interest to give up control of your life and your economy and your own interest rates and everything else. The eurozone is a disaster. Don't let anybody here in the European Parliament tell you that it isn't. It is leading to untold suffering for tens of millions of people who are being driven into unemployment, who are being driven into poverty. And I tell you something, this lot here couldn't care less, because all that matters to them is they preserve their European dream. They're as bad as the communists that went before them and ran Soviet Russia and led so many of those people into misery.
Earlier speaking to Nick Griffin about his opinions on UKIP, he pretty much said the same thing as what you're saying against UKIP, for example. It was just UKIP is just a sort of ideology about this is a third sort of party trying to take over the Liberal Democrats. What do you say to things like that?
I couldn't care less what Nick Griffin says. I'm not interested. Next question, please.
Okay. Many analysis, for example, on the EU say it was a political dream in which all economies could function together. And the fact was to be sort of a copy of the United States of America. It says all countries would help each other. Why is this not happening?
Well, the difference with America is that when America was set up, people left their homes in Europe, went to the States, started with a blank sheet of paper, and had the intention of forming, very quickly of forming a country. And they did it. And they had some brilliant people, and they wrote a very good constitution, and on they went. Interestingly, it took them 100 years after forming a country to have a proper monetary union. In Europe, we've tried it the other way round. And the differences are that in Europe, there is no such thing as a European demos. There is no such thing as a real sense of European identity. And I tell you what, if you took this programme and we went to all 27 countries and we stopped 1,000 people at random in one of the major cities and we showed them their national flag and this wretched thing,
right,
and we said to them, to which do you owe your allegiance? I know what the answer is before we ask the question, and you know what the answer is. So we don't want a United States of Europe. It is not desired, and I would argue that if we attempt to impose this flag and an anthem and a police force and an army upon the peoples of Europe without their consent, far from that being a recipe for peace and harmony, we risk what happened in Yugoslavia.
But aren't you then further, has to put it more bluntly, maybe pay more racial segregation into the policies as well?
The principle of national self-determination on a democratic basis, I don't think we can call
well, you obviously want less immigration and...
That's a separate issue. That's a separate issue. Stick to this point. You know, in 1950, there were 60 countries in the world. There are now 220 countries in the world. All over the world, the principle of national self-determination has seen big and often artificial states break down into smaller states that people recognise, identify with, and where they wish to govern themselves. The only part of the world in which we're attempting to reverse that process is here in Europe. And it isn't going to work because people don't want it.
Okay, let's move on to another topic. The topic is going to be about the first past the post system in Britain.
My favourite system, yeah.
So, are you with Nick Clegg on this? About proportional representation?
Well, it's not often I agree with Nick Clegg, but I suppose when it comes to this... I mean, look, I think the first past the post system worked brilliantly when, for most of our electoral history in the UK, we had two parties. You know, and that worked and it was fine. The Whigs and the Tories and the Liberals and the Tories, and then after the First World War, the Labour and the Tories. But our electoral system has changed so much that first past the post has now fallen, I think, into total disrepute. You know, if you're a high Tory in Sheffield and it's a rainy Thursday evening, just what is the point of walking down to the polling station when you know it's going to be a massive Labour majority anyway? I think we do need electoral reform within the UK. I personally was very disappointed by what Clegg agreed to, the AV system, which nobody understood, and which actually was preferential as opposed to proportional. The system that we in UKIP think would work the best is AV+, where you would have two ballot papers in each constituency, so you would still get...
Wouldn't the problem of hung parliaments still coexist in there?
Well, actually, I think the problem of hung parliaments are going to happen anyway, because we have this fracturing of UK politics. We have the growth of nationalist politics, particularly in Scotland and places like that. So I think actually our electoral system may well not give us majorities anyway. And I don't think that we should necessarily fear coalition governments. I mean, Germany has had coalition governments ever since 1945. And to tell you what, they've run themselves quite well since then, really, haven't they?
But then you can also argue Australia implemented the same system, but its voting system has gone down. Every year it's been going down and down, less people voting, less people taking interest, because since the system came in power. So they are now considering going back to the first past post system. Well,
look, it's for each country to decide what system suits it best, all right? I just think that something remarkable has happened in the UK. You know, in the 1955 general election, think about this, 97% of all votes went to two parties. And now it's less than 2/3 that goes to those two parties.
So you think it's important to have mathematically elected politicians in relation to the chamber that they're selected?
I don't think it has to be precise, but I think it has to at least be generally heading in the right direction. And right at the moment, we have this very odd situation where UKIP, in the last Euro elections under PR, came second across the entire United Kingdom, which was an amazing achievement, and yet we still haven't got a seat in Westminster. So the one party that first past the post discriminates against more than anybody is us. But I'm not arguing for change for the sake of the party. You know, tribal party politics isn't my priority. Having self-government and a proper democratic system within our country is.
Okay. And what about the obviously new constitution about the elected 5 years in Parliament? And what do you think about the elected Lords now?
This idea that Cameron's come up with of a fixed 5-year term is just baloney. Absolute nonsense. And if there's a major crisis and his own party were to vote in the House of Commons against him in a motion of confidence, there would have to be a general election. So I think that idea is nonsense. As far as the Lords is concerned, I think reform of the House of Lords is actually a very low priority. I think the much bigger priority is getting back control of our country from a set of European institutions that now make 75% of our laws. So House of Lords reform, not a high priority for me. Amongst Joe Public, almost a zero priority. But ultimately, I do think we have to have an elected upper chamber of some kind. But I don't think the Clegg proposals work, and I'll tell you why. The idea that you elect somebody for a 15-year term and they're not allowed to stand again goes completely against any argument of holding people to account. The whole point of holding people to account is they have to come back to you and ask to be re-elected, and you've got the ability to fire them. So I think the Clegg proposals are wrong, but I think ultimately we will head towards an elected upper house, but I don't think it's the most important thing. The most important thing is getting back control of our country.
And coming back to getting control of your country, the MEPs for the UKIP party have fallen by 5 now?
No, 1.
By 1. Okay, Nick Griffin probably gave me some
Any comments,
things,
Mr. Griffin's no interest to me whatsoever.
That, okay. So what's the future looking for, like UKIP?
Well, UKIP have gone. In the space of the last 18 months, we've trebled in the opinion polls. When people are asked the question, how would you vote if there were a general election tomorrow? We've trebled in the last 18 months. If you look week after week at local district and county council by-elections, you'll see that in our stronger areas, we're now putting in 30% scores on quite a regular basis. Just last week, there was one in Kent and one in Buckinghamshire. So things have been good for us. People are joining us, credible people are joining us, and there is a real sense of momentum and buzz and excitement about the whole UKIP thing. We are still, in political terms, a teenager.
Is it true?
And we've had our problems, and we've had an awful lot of people over the years, in the early stages of UKIP, who have been elected for us that you wouldn't necessarily choose, and that is all part of the growing up experience, but we're getting there.
Would you say traditionally you would be conservative?
I wasn't conservative, I was Thatcherite. You know, I thought the radical economic reform that she brought in the 1980s, whilst it was painful if you were a miner from South Yorkshire, actually made Britain a modern 20th century country.
Isn't UKIP sort of there to split the vote for Conservative?
Up until about 3 years ago, we took half our votes from the Tories, and the other half of our votes came from patriotic old Labour, classical old Liberals, and from people who felt completely outside the whole system. So we always drew our support from across a wide spectrum. Our growth in the last 18 months, whilst we have taken Lib Dems, whilst we have taken Labour, the real big growth in our support has come from the Conservative Party, as millions of Conservative Party's voters wake up to the fact that Cameron is not Eurosceptic, Cameron is not patriotic, Cameron will not stand up for traditional Conservative values, and frankly, millions of them feel he's let them down like a cheap pair of braces.
So what do you think is going to happen with the new election coming up now in Britain? Do you think Conservative are going to...
It's very tough to say. I mean, look, we've got a big round of county council elections next year in 2013. We've got the Euro elections of 2014, in which, you know, my party is going to go out there and try and win. And then probably...
And do you reckon you got a good chance of getting some more seats?
I think we've got a chance of winning. I think we've got a chance in 2014 of causing an earthquake in British politics. I hope so.
So are you the person that's going to say, I told you so? Are you in that position yet?
I'm never going to say that. I'm never going to say that, because no one likes a smart aleck. I'll let other people make their own minds up on that. And as far as 2015 is concerned, who knows? You know, it may be that Cameron can save his position, but to do that, he's going to need some pretty radical policy shifts from where he is now.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today for the question and answer session. And I hope you all the success in the future, Nigel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.